Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Rooted in Love, where we combine both spirituality and social justice to create a world that is more rooted in love together. And today I'm so excited to bring on such incredible guests and those who I've been so deeply inspired by listening to their own work, Ariana Fotinakis and Vanessa Lesperance from Decolonize and Rize, who are leading incredible change work to decolonize and transform organizations and really doing the work to get back into Indigenous-led practices that allow us to be more rooted and connected together. And so I'm so excited to bring you both on. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I would love to invite you all to answer our first question, which is related to this idea of being rooted in love. And wondering for you both, what kind of practices or tools allow you all to stay rooted in love in your own day to day?
Tanshe Kiowow, Vanessa Lesperance, Anishinaabe. And what I said there in my language is, hello everyone, how are you? My name is Vanessa Lesperance, and I'm a mixed heritage woman. I'm European settler on my dad's side, Red River Métis on my mom's paternal side, and I'm a citizen of Manitoba Métis Federation. And I would like to acknowledge I'm joining you all today from the traditional, ancestral, and stolen territory of Kakite First Nation, also known as New Westminster. And for those who don't know, Kakite means resting place. Grateful for the original stewards of these lands and to be an uninvited guest here. I've been on a journey of decolonizing my own mindset, and it's been quite the experience. I wasn't raised in my Métis heritage. And it was something that I discovered. I found out about my lineage in my early 20s. At that same time, I was working in a corporate environment. So you don't get much more colonial than that, working in a large corporation. So for any other folks who are in corporate right now, you know what I mean, listening to this. And so after leaving the corporate world, it took me a really long time to divest from that thinking that really upholds Western colonial capitalist ideologies, thoughts, and ways of being, which in part is very individualistic. Our Western colonial capitalist society is very siloed, and that's by design. I realized how critical it is and the importance of like community care and well-being when it comes to the collective. I used to think well-being as like just an individual thing, that it's like, oh, well, it only benefits me, therefore it's a selfish pursuit. And I realized actually being in community, being with friends and family, that's part of well-being. And that's also how we can start to decolonize when we break down those individualistic silos, thinking I need to carry whatever it is, X, Y, or Z, all on my own. Oh, I can't burden others. I can't do whatever it is. I have to carry this alone, or no one else will be interested, or whatever the case is. And I realized that's part of living in the society that we are in now and how we're conditioned to do that. So part of well-being for me is being with others, having meaningful conversations, having meals together, being outside on the land with folks, and also anything we can do to kind of divest from our devices. So for me, that's what's I've been sitting with a lot lately, is just how profound it is to be in community or co-build community with others, and create those support networks, because that support networks, being in community, really supports our holistic well-being.
Ani Buju, Ariana Indigenous, Nindunjaba, Aamjiwnaang First Nation, Makwanendodam, Ninshigodaya, Unceded, Coast Salish, Nababamadiz. And so what I said there was, hello, my relatives. My name is Ariana. I am also a mixed heritage woman. So on my mother's side, my family comes from the Aamjiwnaang First Nation in so-called Ontario. And on my father's side, my family comes from Methoni in Greece. And today I have the pleasure of joining you from the traditional and stolen territories of the Hulkaminam and Sinchothan speaking peoples on what's colonially known as Salt Spring Island. And so I live on a little island just off the west coast of so-called British Columbia. It's a rural-ish island, quite a big farming community. And that's one of the things that I really love about living here is, like, there's the colonial aspects of homesteading and, even all the ways that like permaculture has become co-opted and everything, when really it is rooted in Indigenous understandings of interdependence and working with and caring for the land. But what I do love about living here is that there is a big conversation around what does it mean to feed ourselves and feed our community? How can we, as this little tiny island here, knowing that when supply chain issues happen, that we tend to be among the first impacted? I love that there are a lot of conversations here around food sovereignty and what does it mean to be less reliant on these larger systems and larger corporations. And there's actually a lot of really good work being done by one of the local nations and working to rebuild the ecosystem and plant native foods. I think there was 400 camas bulbs that were planted in one of the stewards, Maya, she's called My Grandmother's Garden, and it's so her grandmother may be able to eat her traditional foods again. So I feel very grateful and very fortunate to live in a place where work like this is happening. If I'm being truly honest, and when I look at what really does restore me, it's spending time with my relatives that don't speak. And that's my relatives, the trees and the plants and the animals and being by the water. Anytime I go out, whether it's for a short walk down my street or I go out into the forest, I don't know if I would call what we have here mountains compared to where I used to live, but even going up on the mountain, it reminds me of my smallness, but in a very humbling way, not in a powerlessness way, but in remembering that there are so many of these beings and these ancestors that have been here for thousands and thousands of years, and they'll be here long after I'm gone. And especially when things in the world are really big and really heavy as they are right now, remembering that every year the leaves are going to fall off the trees and every spring the lilacs are going to bloom again and my chickens are going to start laying more eggs and sprouts are going to pop up and the thimbleberry shoots and all these things. Like there's such a predictability and a rhythm in that. And I find that really helps me stay rooted and tethered when everything around me is like, what the F?
It just feels like, right, these ideas of interdependence, of food sovereignty, all these things that we have been totally cut off from in our society and our upbringings, that again has cut us off from that ability to create connection with both the land, with nature, with each other. That is like really such a devastating loss that I feel so much grief for. And so this is why I'm like just so inspired by the work that you're all doing. So I would love to backtrack a little bit to talk a little bit about your own inner journeys of decolonizing and your upbringings of how you got into this space and unlearning for your individual selves.
You know, when I look back at the last, 14 or 15 years, it's only been within maybe the last like 5 to 6 years where I've really had the language and like understood that I was decolonizing, that I was unprogramming and unconditioning myself from our dominant narrative. And I say decolonizing very intentionally because I'm still doing it, right? Like there are still many ways that my internal colonizer likes to show up. But I struggled with addiction for 10 years, and when I got sober and when I was looking at like, okay, like what led to this? Like there were so many years where I was like, oh, I just like to party. I just like to have fun. I just liked a good time. And it wasn't until I started looking deeper within myself, and for me, breathwork was the catalyst for that. When I started really looking at what was beneath the surface, because even in my first 6 years of sobriety, it was still relatively easy for me to like keep this very polished and perfect mask up, to feel like I had to hide parts of myself. It took a lot of like long and slow and intentional and quite painful work at times. I didn't grow up connected to my community or to my culture. My mom is a Sixties Scoop survivor, so she was taken from her community when she was an infant. And while I always knew that I was First Nations, I didn't know anything about my people. I like read our monthly newsletter, and that was kind of my like way of staying connected. As I started learning more about our worldviews, about this deep connection with the land and how the land is a relative and is our teacher, it started to show like threads and pieces that had been present throughout my life. And even when I was in active addiction, going out in the mountains alone, and like it was probably very dangerous for me to like be quite drunk out in the mountains alone. But there was always these times where I felt this like moment of like, right, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is who I am. And so, yeah, as I said, it's a process that is still ongoing. I still catch myself feeling like I should have things more figured out. Becoming a parent 4.5, almost 5 years ago really showed me how difficult it was for me still to like ask for and receive help. And so that's been a really big thing that I've been working on for the past 4-ish years. But I think that's also what keeps me humbled in knowing that there's no pressure to like get anywhere by any specific point. And I think it can also be very easy to take the pressures that are present in capitalism and colonialism to like get somewhere and to achieve something. And I see how we can sometimes apply those pressures to ourselves and one another around, not knowing enough, not being far enough along on our decolonizing journeys, about still falling back into old patterns. And I think that falling back into old patterns means that we're human, and being able to recognize it and pull ourselves out of it and hopefully catch ourselves more quickly next time is part of the human journey. And I think, Vanessa and I, we always talk about progress, not perfection. That for me has been a really big piece of my own decolonizing journey, because I was very much a perfectionist, and those tendencies still live there for sure.
I wasn't raised with my Métis culture. And when I was young, so I'm an only child, my mom raised me on her own. And, but I was fortunate to have my Nana and Papa in my life. And I've always been really close with my aunties. My mom's side of the family was really small, but we were like really tight knit. And even though we kind of all lived in different cities, we were all like really tight knit. And I remember like growing up, other kids would be like, "Oh, I don't really know my auntie and uncle." I'm like, "What? You don't know your aunties and uncles? Like, that's awful. Like, that sucks." Because like I felt like my aunties were like almost like, second moms. And actually, I lived with one of my aunties for a while growing up. And so anyways, I grew up not being connected with the culture. We never talked about anything. I have a French last name, and my papa was Catholic. So I'm like, oh, I guess we're French Catholic. That's the extent of what I knew. But I always craved, I yearned for something more. And then again, when I found out being Métis in my 20s, I was so excited. And I was just full of so much pride. And yet I was hesitant to like boldly claim it, or, say that I was claimed to be Métis, because I'm like, well, I wasn't raised with the culture. And two, like, I'm super white looking. So who am I to claim this side of me? But then as we started to like dig into our genealogy, as I started to learn about our ancestors, I'm like our people are like really badass. And, I have several ancestors who were part of the Red River Resistance, fighting, essentially colonizers, fighting Canada for our rights on our own homelands against, it's interesting, I'm reading a book by Maria Campbell called Half-Breed, and she called the settlers immigrants. And it's so interesting that now the white folks call other folks immigrants, forgetting that they are actually the original immigrants. And so anyways, resisting the displacement of our people by the immigrants or the settlers or the colonizers. And so knowing who I come from, I had such a strong sense of pride. So my question became, it changed from who am I to accept this part of my heritage, to who am I not to accept this part of my heritage? Because by not acknowledging it, not only am I ignoring my ancestors' legacy and just sweeping it under the rug, I'm also simultaneously letting the colonizers win, because that was their goal, right? For all Indigenous peoples to let go of their culture. And to relinquish that through forced assimilation and through genocidal tactics. So with that mindset, I've been on a journey of, reclaiming the side of me. And it's also been a struggle, as Ariana said. And I realized like often there's like this internal struggle that I have inside of me, and it's resisting that assimilation. because it's so easy in our Western colonial world, in our dominant society, to give into the capitalism, to give into the consumerism, to give into the hyper individualistic tendencies, and to have this mindset. And so I find it's like I have to like actively, it's a choice, right? To decolonize. And this is why we do a lot of nervous system stuff in our work, because this work, like important work, change making work, social justice, reconciliation, anti-racism, whatever it is, it's going to be unsettling, right? It's not going to be easy work. And that's why we need to be so well in tune with our nervous systems. And at the same time, I'm so proud to be doing this work, and to actively decolonize. And like I said, a big part of it was also leaving a corporate environment, which is inherently very colonial and very capitalist. So being on self-employed has really allowed me to deepen that journey. I'm proud to be on the executive of my local through Manitoba Métis Federation, as a way to just be a part of community and co-build, and help other Métis folks reconnect to their culture. And again, this isn't always easy work, right? And we have to confront old beliefs, and it's continually learning and unlearning. And yet this is what's needed of all of us if we're going to resist harmful, oppressive systems that we're all surrounded by.
It is like one of the hardest things to have to unlearn, going upstream against the norm of society by doing this work of like, actually, wait, this isn't my conditioning. This is all conditioning. This isn't my actual authentic truth. And so very, very powerful work that you are leading to. And my next question is going a little bit deeper now and talking about spirituality, especially in a time where a lot of folks have had religious trauma, or are, just really turned away from the idea of exploring anything inner world, outside of this material world. And wondering if you all are open to sharing also about your own spiritual paths and how that has shaped your own worldviews, how you show up, or if you're open to sharing about your own belief practices too.
As mentioned, I was raised Catholic, which is very common for Métis folks. Many Métis people are Catholic, but my family was never devout. We were very just like, oh, we'll show up at we'll go to Christmas Eve Mass, and we'll go like once or twice a year, and that was it. It never resonated with me though. Like I never felt connected to Catholicism. In my late teens, early 20s, I did become quite a holy roller in Protestant Christianity. And it's only because I moved into an apartment building with a bunch of, they're called YWAMers, Youth with a Mission. And so there was a bunch of young people my age. I was new to the city. I just moved back to Victoria from Winnipeg. And like all these young people lived around me. I'm like, oh, great, built-in friends. And they just all happened to be super Christian. So I rode that train for a little bit until I became so disillusioned and just so sick of the hypocrisy that I noticed in the church and regular churchgoers, and I just couldn't get behind it anymore. And then especially going to university, I studied English Lit, and a lot of English literature is based in Europe, and you can't really study literature from like the 16, 17, 1800s without it direct linkages to the church. And I just found out like just how corrupt the church was. I'm like, this religion is based on just so much like shady practices that's based on exploitation from people. I'm like, this is wild. Like, I love the teachings of Christ. Like he was radical, and he was like badass, and Jesus was for the people. But this religion has co-opted it, especially on Turtle Island or North America, and they've made it something that it isn't. And so I definitely became very disillusioned from the church. But I feel like I've always been spiritual, and knowing that there's something greater out there, and just seeing like the beauty that surrounds us, right? And just knowing how truly, like literally everything is interconnected. And there's a word for that in Michif, or it's a Cree word called Wakotwin. And Wakotwin literally means like the kinship of everything, how everything is interconnected and interrelated. And that's so true. And so when we take a step back to appreciate that, it's like you can tell it was by it was by design. Like someone created that, right? And so I've always believed in a sense of creator. I've never believed in something that's a coincidence. I always feel that things happen that are meant to. In terms of like people you meet or opportunities that come across your path, and this caused me to study this in my master's degree. So I have a master's in leadership, and I wanted to look at decolonizing the workplace through workplace spirituality. And it was cool having these conversations with participants, and it was really mindful of hearing from Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks in my research. And the thing that came up over and over again in our conversations about spirituality, regardless of someone's religious or spiritual beliefs, was connection. And I realized that when we talk about spirituality, a lot of people, that means a deep, meaningful connection to self, others, the land, and a higher power, whatever that higher power is for folks. So whether it's God, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Allah, whoever it is, or maybe it's just nature, maybe it's grandfather sun, maybe it's grandmother moon, maybe it's another creator, but whatever it is, it's just that deeper connection to something greater than self. That's what spirituality is. And so, and whether you could even be an atheist and still be spiritual, because it's about that meaningful connection. And so that's definitely what I believe in. When we cultivate those meaningful connections to self, others, the land, and a higher being or higher power, that's how we can be in tune spiritually.
I grew up spending a lot of time with my Greek side of the family, and they're Greek Orthodox. And so I actually did spend a fair amount of time in the Greek Orthodox Church, but I don't speak a word of Greek. So I had no idea what they were saying at all. And my papu passed away last year. And so it was my first time being back in the church in like, gosh, I don't know how many years, probably over 20 years. And it was the first time where I had seen them do it in Greek and in English. So it was my first time actually hearing what they were saying. And I was so grateful that I didn't understand any of it when I was younger. Because holy smokes. It's like, no wonder people have religious trauma. Oh my gosh, you're at a funeral and you're saying these things. Um, it was intense. But Vanessa, to your point around like co-opting things, like there were so many things as I'm watching the priest. I don't even know what it's called, but he's got the thing and the incense in it and he's like waving it over the casket. I was like, oh, okay, I recognize this, like doing some smoke cleansing. And then he goes in the 4 directions. And it was just really interesting. But to even just see these little tiny parallels between what was happening in that church and what my ancestors would practice on my mom's side. We prayed the 4 directions. We use smoke to cleanse and to connect our prayers up to the Creator. And so it's just interesting to see that. And with my own spiritual practice, I think through most of my life, I have always been searching for something that helped me feel connected. I think even when I was drinking and doing a lot of drugs, I was looking to feel connected to other people. Certain substances allow you to feel connection to something beyond yourself. And I was really seeking that. I have a Buddhist symbol tattooed on my back that I got when I was 18 because I was like, maybe this is the avenue. Through a lot of that as well, it was also from a very individualistic perspective. Once I started having kind of a more consistent spiritual practice in my early 20s, it was about personal growth. It was about knowing myself more. It was from a fairly like colonial capitalist perspective. I think sometimes that may need to be the starting point for people. We live in a very individualistic society. The vast majority of us, I can't say everybody, but many people are raised, within the nuclear family. We're raised to like look out for ourselves, look out for our families. There isn't this broader perspective or this understanding that what happens externally also impacts us internally. And I think like sometimes we got to meet people where they're at. And so if a spiritual practice starts with like crystals and manifestation and like whatever, if that is someone's gateway, I think it's important, because if it starts to help them connect more deeply to themselves, maybe from there is this avenue to start to look beyond themselves. It might start there, but if we let it, it can take us a lot deeper, and it can show us that there is so much more beyond the surface. Again, for me, that was with breath work. When I first tried breath work, I had no idea what I was doing. I just saw breath work on this retreat itinerary, and I was like, cool, I've done yoga before. Like, I think I've done this. It was like the biggest, most intense experience of my life, where it felt as though everything I had ever stuffed down with a bottle or a pill, it's like it came up to be felt, and in the moment it felt like it was gone. I learned later there was still a lot more work to do, but it really helped me face a lot of the things that I had been avoiding, and it gave me such a deep sense of connection to myself and to my mom. And for me, that was a really big part of my healing journey, of like letting myself open up to like receive the love of my mom. To this day, breath work is still a very big part of my practice. Again, being out on the land, all of these things that remind me that it's like, it's not just me and it's not my problems and all these things running on in my head. Like, in the grand scheme of things, they really do not matter, because there is such a bigger world out there. There is so much beauty. There is so much life, and all of it is going to continue like long after I am turned back into soil.
I'd actually love to pivot now into Decolonize and Rize, and this work that you all have been doing internally and now bringing it out for others to learn and to transform and to reprogram as well. And around the topic specifically of spirituality and spirituality in the workplace, how you are doing this kind of decolonization, healing work with people maybe in work settings that don't see spirituality as an important or essential aspect of just doing the direct action or whatever kind of organizing or even corporate work that they are focused on.
In our work, we don't talk about spirituality per se, like explicitly. But I think anytime, for example, we do like a lot of lunch and learns. I mean, we've done a lot of like Indigenous well-being circles, like with Indigenous team members. And we also do like well-being circles for like just all staff or team members as well. We're really good at creating containers where folks feel like they can just fully show up, like themselves, and create environments where people can open up and have real and meaningful conversations to allow for that connection. So that goes back to that definition of spirituality, creating deep connection to self, others, the land, and a higher being and higher power. In our circles, they're typically online, so we're not on the land, and we don't necessarily invite in folks to call in a higher power, but just to have that time to meaningfully connect with others. And then the feedback we see, it has like really big impacts on folks. And I think that in of itself allows folks to be spiritually connected, when you can actually go beyond the surface and connect with others, just human to human, and just talk about like real shit and just like real emotions, real feelings. So I would say like that's one aspect in our work. And that's also part of decolonizing, when we can just be humans and not, like be like, put on this fake professional veneer. In my master's research, I remember so clearly, was doing I called them focus groups, but they were really sharing circles. And one guy mentioned, he was like, it's like when men wear business suits and you have a necktie, it's like symbolically cutting off your head from your heart. And yeah, and that always stuck with me. And Elder Buckshot, an elder I work with at the Justice Institute, she says the longest journey we'll ever take is from our head to our heart. And especially in our Western colonial capitalist world, where the emphasis is on thinking, rational thought, clear reasoning, all these things. And then we're asked to cut ourselves off emotionally and spiritually in the workplace. So when we can integrate all of that, honor all of us, who we are as a human, that's really important to us in the work that we do. So whether we're doing lunch and learn circles, whether we're doing leadership training, strategic planning, we wanted to invite in that whole human experience.
Yeah, I feel like that really is just a whole a whole 180 shift of what we think of in the workplace, of just being in like go mode, hustle culture, all of those things that now we're starting to realize, like, wait, actually this is causing burnout, exhaustion, illness, all the things. And yet still figuring out the balance of, okay, how do we show up in this way of being our authentic selves, our grounded selves, and being able to honor others' emotions while also getting the work done still, because then it can easily go to the other side where it's just like, all right, let's just all. And so wondering how you advise organizations and leaders to be able to intertwine the two.
Yeah, I think that was a big thing that we kind of came to realize after last year. You know, we've done a lot of lunch and learns, and sometimes we'd even work with organizations ongoing. So we'd meet with them every couple weeks or every couple months. But yeah, there was this disconnect between this inner connection to self and then the realities of what the job requires. Um, and so this year, we've decided to step more into leadership development and training and strategic planning to look at things from like the level of the organization. So it's no longer just like coming in for this like nice feel good experience for team members, which don't get me wrong, I still love. Like if a couple hours with us gives you a bit of a reprieve in your day, amazing. Like you deserve that. And I would like to be part of a long-term solution within organizations. So, with our leadership training, it's about helping leaders, the ones who are making decisions within the organizations, the ones who are managing teams. It's about helping them become more aware of themselves. What systems are they replicating? What systems of harm are they replicating in how they're leading and how the organization is being run? Um, what kind of expectations are they putting on themselves and their teams? Are they expecting their team members to be available at all hours of the day? You know, this is something that I've heard a lot from folks is like the company will give them a subscription to a meditation app, but then there's still like an expectation that they're constantly available. It's like, there's kind of a disconnect there. And even with that, you know, like something else that I'm thinking of too is just like how workplace well-being is often sold as like well, it'll make your team members more productive. And sometimes like we've even had to use that language because again, we have to meet people where they are. But it's like, it's not just about increasing productivity. It's about actually caring for the people that you work for. It's about caring for the families of the people that work for you, because if your team members are constantly burned out, and that's going to impact their family life. And so our hope is with the leadership training and the strategic planning being taking a longer term approach. So one of our lunch and learn circles is decolonizing organizations. And we provide some practical ideas and people do some idea generating on ways they can decolonize their workplace. And usually at the end of a 2.5 or 3 hour circle, people are like, okay, well, how do we do this? And so if an organization has been running a certain way for decades, it is going to take time. Things aren't going to change overnight, just as with our society, right? It took hundreds of years for colonization to fully settle in. It's going to take us a long time to recalibrate and find whatever our new normal is. But with strategic planning, our aim is to start to take a longer term approach to identifying the changes that need to be made in an organization and looking at what needs to happen in order for those changes to be made.
One of the teachings of the medicine wheel is about finding balance in things. And in our Western colonial capitalist world, we've lost that balance. So in part, Western colonial capitalist patriarchal world. In the world of work, it's been very male dominated, white male dominated, right? And so as a result, it's been very male, focused on rational thinking, impersonal relations in the workplace. And so we've lost that balance. So when we start to decolonize, we invite in that matriarchal way of being, which means it's not about women dominating, but it's about finding balance, ensuring to respect all people's contributions. And so we invite in, that rational thinking, which we need, using our head and balancing it with the heart too, right? So it's about blending both. It's about finding time for work and productivity, and also time for rest. It's time for building connections, building relationships with one another, and also being productive and getting work done. So it's not one or the other; it's both and inviting in that balance. So I think a lot of folks might think, oh, decolonizing business, it means like we just spend all day just talking and not getting stuff done, building relationships. That's a part of it, but we also need to get work. So it's about, like I said, providing that balance.
Can we create a decolonized world while capitalism still exists, or does the entire system need to be thrown out? And wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
I would say I'm not naive in thinking that, we're going to decolonize the banking system. We're going to decolonize Wall Street. We're going to decolonize massive global corporations like Walmart. I think their business models are inherently colonial. They're inherently extractive and exploitative. So I think our aim isn't to dismantle that. For me personally, I'll speak for myself, it's working with folks who actually get it, who want to build something new, right? And it means having businesses that are equitable. A really clear example of that is paying people living wages. Minimum wage, I think, is a crime, because someone working for you full time should be able to support themselves, should be able to have accommodation, food, and provide for their bills. And you can't even do that on minimum wage for yourself, let alone if you have family, right? And so to me, that's criminal, and that's based on exploitative and extractive practices. So a really clear starting point is making sure you pay people a living wage, which for a lot of organizations is going to be a big adjustment, right? And so, but there are ways we can start to collectively decolonize. And that's why I personally love working with smaller and medium-sized businesses, because they are more nimble and adaptive to be able to do that. But larger organizations can make little tweaks. And Ariana and I are not naive to the fact we don't think decolonizing is going to happen in our lifetime, right? It's a massive thing, but there's things everyone can do to start to decolonize. And really, it starts at the individual level and with our own mindsets. And that's something everyone can do, no matter where you work. And that's why leadership training is really important for us, because it starts at that individual level.
Ariana, I actually want to ask you a question, if that's okay, if you can follow up with your addition too, is around this idea of, yes, having people be able to get a living wage and starting to change the systems and the norms. And yet there's also so much fear in supremacy and colonization that, like, a lot of times there's a scarcity mindset of, we don't have enough to be able to do that. Like, that's not even possible. And I guess that sort of leads into the nervous system work of, how do we become feeling safety in creating that space of, wait, everyone has value. And if you could speak maybe to the nervous system work and whatever also you wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think even on the scarcity front, as a business coach, I've worked with a lot of small business owners, and it is wild to me how much money some business owners can spend in order to make more money. Like, I've worked with so many entrepreneurs who have like relatively small businesses who have very high monthly expenses, because they believe that they need to have all of this technology and all of these platforms in place in order to streamline and automate and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And if they spend all this money, they're going to make more money. So it's like, of course, you're going to feel like you don't have enough if you're spending like $500 a month on your tech and you have like a very small business, right? And I think, again, it comes back to like starting to deprogram and unhooking from these narratives of like, well, what does my business actually need? What do I need in order to run my business? What is important to me? Is making, I don't know, whatever, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month, is that important to me? Does me as a small business owner, do I have a different level of enoughness? It's so easy to get swept up in capitalism and to believe that things have to run a certain way and they have to look a certain way. And especially when I moved out here, when I looked at like what our expenses are, I would welcome lots of money. And I know I don't need lots of money. I have identified what I need in order to like pay my bills and put money into the community and cook for people and contribute to GoFundMe's and like save for my daughter's education. Like I know what my level of enoughness is. Again, large corporations, they're built on just like more, right? I don't think there's changing that. But for a lot of small business owners, even medium-sized business owners, you grow and you acquire more and it costs more to run the business. But especially for small business owners, it's relatively easy for us to do a hard audit and look at like, do I actually need to be spending money on all of these things? Or can I afford to pay this person that's working for me a living wage? Our society is built on scarcity, the economic system. So I'm a trauma of money facilitator. And in one of the workshops that we do, we talk about the economic system. And economics is the study of scarcity and how people respond to limited resources. And that is what our economic system is built on. It is built on supply and demand. It is built on there's less of this now, so spend more, buy it now, act quick. There's so much urgency. There's so much pressure. And so all of this is built into our day-to-day buying decisions. Excuse me. And this shows up in our nervous systems. We respond to scarcity, whether it's real or perceived. So if we come from people who lived in scarcity, if we at one point in our life lived in poverty, even if we are at a point now where we have enough, if we have not worked with that part of our physiology, we can still act as though we are operating from that. And then again, when we have those reinforcements from our dominant society, it's very easy to get swept up in scarcity. And so, yes, this is where a lot of the nervous system work comes in. This is where understanding yourself and being able to notice when that arises. It's not about eradicating it, but it is about noticing like, oh, am I making this decision from a place of scarcity? Or am I making this decision from something that's rooted in fact? Am I taking a moment to like notice the feelings and notice the activation and notice that this feels really scary for me? And can I pause and be with that and then look at what's actually in front of me?
So there's one question that I would love to ask, which is in this future vision of, as you mentioned, that maybe it's not going to necessarily be in our lifetime that we're going to see a decolonized world. And yet, what are you all looking out towards and longing for in that vision of a decolonized world, knowing that we are still going to be humans and imperfect beings that are still figuring things out, always in infinite time. But yes, what that vision is for you all.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful question. I think, again, the connection really seems like a theme from what we've been talking about today, that all of our relatives have the ability, the resources, the time to cultivate a deeper sense of connection with themselves, with who they are and where they come from, that we have communities that are more connected, that our young ones grow up with a strong sense of who they are and where they come from, with a strong sense of connection with the land, with a strong knowing of where their food comes from, and wherever possible with a connection to that source of food. I think a connection with what nourishes us and sustains us. I feel like I live a very privileged life in that I can work part-time and I can hang out with my kid and we can grow our food. And like, that shouldn't be a privilege. Being able to spend a lot of time with my daughter should not be a privilege. I feel that we should have the right to do meaningful, important work, to do work that, maybe even for some of us, it's not meaningful and important. Maybe it puts food on the table. To be able to do that, but to also have time and space for other things that we enjoy in our lives and the people who we care about.
The vision that I have for a decolonized society is dismantling notions of superiority or supremacy, whether it's based on skin color, your origin, citizen status, your religion, whatever it is, dismantling that instead of rather than saying like, oh, I'm better than, it's just different and that's okay. So respecting our differences and seeing each other as human across our differences. That's something that I dream of and envision. And to something that Ariana said earlier is having a sense of just enoughness, having a sense of like what I have is enough and I'm content with this, rather than that constant striving for more and more, whether it's more wealth, more possessions, whatever that is, and just asking, okay, what do I have? Being content with that, and that's what I hope for our world, and that will eliminate that need, constant drive for consumerism, buying more, and allow us to reclaim our time to do the things that matter, that fill our cup, and allow us to be way more connected with the land and not see it as a resource to extract from, but rather a relative that provides life for us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much again. And I would love to just end with asking if people want to follow your work or want to work with you, how they can get in touch, any initiatives that you'd like to promote on your end too.
So you can find us at our website, www.decolonizedandrize.com. And Decolonize and Rize are both with a Z or a Z, depending on what side of the border you live on. We're also on LinkedIn. That's the only social platform we live on. And we also have our own podcast called Rise Up. So lots of different ways to find us and connect with us.
Just thank you both again for your time and all the labor that you're putting in to really be leading this groundwork that is so needed right now. So yeah, really such an honor to meet you all.